Most people never actually change, they rearrange. They swap one ritual for another, one affirmation deck for a better app. They read the books, follow the accounts, build the morning routine, and still find themselves years later stuck in the same patterns. They carry the same weight, operating at the same frequency they were trying to escape. Carl Jung spent decades studying why. Not the performance of transformation, not the feeling of it, but the real thing. What he found was both clarifying and brutal. You do not grow by adding. You grow by cutting away what is keeping you small. That was Jung's clarifying and brutal insight. There are 5 specific patterns Jung identified as the heaviest anchors on human consciousness. Not surface habits, not things a routine dissolves. Deep psychological structures that most people have built their entire identity around. That is precisely what makes them so hard to release. Release, as Jung understood it, does not mean manage or reduce. It means let die. That is where real transformation begins. The first pattern is the need to be perceived as a good person. Consider how much energy you spend managing others' impressions of you. You bite your tongue because you do not want to seem judgmental. You agree to things you resent because saying no feels selfish. You smile through situations that make you feel invisible or disrespected because being difficult is worse, somehow, than being dishonest. You silence the inconvenient parts of yourself and call this being a good person. Jung called it the persona, the morning mask. The mask is carefully engineered to earn approval, prevent rejection, and make others comfortable enough to keep you around every day. Performing goodness is one of the most exhausting, low-frequency ways a human being can move through the world each day. What drives the persona is not love or integrity. It is fear. Fear of being seen as bad. Fear of being found out. That constant background need to appear acceptable locks you into the frequency of survival. Not growth. Not freedom. Only survival. Jung studied people who had genuinely transformed. What he found was that they had stopped trying to appear good and started being real. Real meant they could be warm and firm, generous and boundaried, compassionate and honest, even when honesty made people uncomfortable around them. A person who has dropped the good persona cannot be controlled through guilt or shame. They already know who they are. For many people, being good was how you kept peace in a volatile house. Performing kindness was how you earned love. Agreeableness was how you made yourself small enough to stay safe, which is why releasing it feels like psychological annihilation. Now, the self built around goodness has to die before something more authentic can take its place. The old mask must fall completely. Jung's marker for genuine release was simple. You can disappoint someone and remain stable, not proud, not indifferent, just grounded. Groundedness is what higher consciousness actually feels like. Not performance, rootedness. A stillness that does not require external confirmation. The second pattern is the compulsion to fix, save, and heal everyone around you. Your desire to help may not be selfless. Jung studied what he called the wounded healer archetype. People magnetically drawn to those who are suffering, feeling most alive when needed. What he found consistently was that this compulsion was almost never about the other person. It was about the helper themselves entirely. When your sense of value is built on being needed, you will unconsciously seek people who need you. This runs very deep. When those people begin to heal and become self-sufficient, you may unconsciously pull away or find new reasons they still need you. If they are okay, the question becomes uncomfortable. Who are you without the role? That silence is what must be faced fully. This is not compassion. It is codependency wearing compassion's clothes, and it operates at a low frequency rooted entirely in lack. I am not enough unless I am needed. My life has no meaning unless something is broken that I can fix. That is the wound. People who had genuinely evolved could offer support when asked and appropriate, and step back when it was not. This is the difference. They could watch someone struggle without making that struggle their emergency. They trusted that the difficulty served a purpose worth keeping. Releasing this pattern does not make you cold. It makes you discerning. Your care comes from fullness rather than from unconscious need. Surrendering the helper identity is genuinely painful. Without it, you face who you are when no one is leaning on you at all. Marker Jung would note, you can hear someone describe a problem and respond with genuine presence without immediately producing solutions or answers. You can say that sounds really hard and mean it without following it with an offer to fix. That is care without control. Third pattern is the attachment to being understood. Think of conversations spent explaining one way, then another approach again. And when it still did not work, you walked away feeling invisible, dismissed, alone inside your own experience and unreachable to others. Jung identified this as one of the most subtle and most destructive forces, keeping people anchored at lower frequencies of consciousness. If you need others to understand you in order to feel valid, you have not yet developed what Jung called internal authority within yourself. Your inner experience only feels real, only feels legitimate, when someone else confirms it. That is a deeply unstable foundation to stand on. Most people, even those who love you, do not have access to your inner world. They have never lived inside your body or history. Waiting for others to fully understand you before you feel grounded means you will be waiting a very long and unsatisfying time indeed. What Jung found in people at genuinely elevated levels was a different relationship with being understood. They shared when it felt right. But they did not need that person to get it in order to feel solid. They knew what they knew. That inner certainty was enough. This is not arrogance, and it is not isolation. It is self-trust. A knowing that does not require external confirmation to remain intact. Releasing the need to be understood requires building a relationship with your own inner knowing that is strong enough to stand unsupported. This work is especially uncomfortable if you were raised in an environment where your perceptions were regularly dismissed or contradicted by others. Jung was clear this release comes with a cost. Some relationships will dissolve. People accustomed to explaining away will not know what to do. People may accuse you of being cold. What is actually happening is that you are making space for real connection that does not require you. The marker is this: someone misunderstands you and you feel something, maybe sadness, but not destabilization. You walk away without chasing. Your inner world feels real regardless of whether anyone else can access it. That is self-trust, and self-trust is a high-frequency state. Fourth pattern is the fantasy of who someone could become. You have someone who consistently disappoints you, and yet you stay. You can see who they could be. The version that has done the work, the version that finally shows up how you need. Jung called this projection. He was emphatic that it is one of the most powerful forces keeping people trapped in painful, repetitive dynamics. When you see potential in someone and relate to that potential, rather than who they actually are, you are not seeing them at all. You are seeing something placed onto them. A story you need to be true. A version of them you need to exist. Maybe you need them to be safe so you stop feeling anxious. Maybe you need them to change so you avoid facing loss. Whatever the need is, it belongs to you, not to them. Jung found this distinction was central to everything that followed for people. Jung found that people who had genuinely elevated their consciousness learned to see others with clear eyes, not cynically, but clearly, always. They could observe someone's behavior, take it seriously, and make decisions based on what was actually present, rather than what they hoped for. People can change, but they change on their own timeline, for their own reasons. When they are ready, you cannot want it for them. Releasing this fantasy requires grief. Real grief. You are not letting go of hope. You are letting go of a person who never existed. A version of someone you may have loved for years who was never really there. Jung said this: grief was non-negotiable. You cannot skip it. You have to mourn the person you believed they could be before you can see the person they are. The grief clears the distortion completely. And once you can see them clearly, you can make a real decision. Not based on potential or possibility, based on current reality right now. Is this person, as they are right now, someone who belongs in my life? That is the only question that matters. The only real one. You will know you have released this when you can watch someone show you exactly who they are and believe them without overlaying the story. That is clarity. And clarity is one of the most liberating frequencies a person can operate from. It changes everything that follows from it. The fifth pattern is the identity of being wounded. If you have been through trauma, acknowledging that matters. Feeling the pain matters fully. Understanding how those experiences shape the way you move through the world matters. Jung did not question any of that at all. What Jung questioned was what happens when the wound becomes the center of your identity. When the story of what happened becomes primary. When your trauma history becomes your primary introduction to new people, your main framework for understanding yourself and your entire place in the world. Because that is fundamentally different from healing. Jung saw that many people articulated their wounds with depth, but never moved past them. They understood their trauma, but they were still organizing their entire existence around it, making choices through the filter of what happened. Jung was direct about what frequency that operates at. It is the frequency of victim consciousness, an orientation, not a shameful label. An orientation that says what was done to me determines what is possible for me. What happened then defines who I am today and tomorrow. Many people unconsciously resist moving beyond the wounded identity because there are genuine benefits to holding it. People treat you more gently. Your struggles make sense. You belong to a community. You have an explanation for why things are hard. This is deeply human, and you need not take full responsibility for who you are becoming, because you can always point to what you went through. None of that is malicious. It is deeply human, but it keeps people stuck. Jung saw this with unflinching clarity and said so directly. Releasing the wounded identity does not mean pretending the harm did not happen. It does not mean minimizing what you went through or performing toughness. It means integrating those experiences rather than centering them, becoming someone who carries what happened without being defined by it completely. Someone who has scars but is not organized around them. The question shifts from why am I this way to who am I becoming? That shift from past harm to present becoming is one of the highest frequencies human consciousness can reach. It requires real authorship. Because it requires you to claim authorship of your own life even when you have very legitimate reasons not to. That is the hardest work. You will know you have released this when your trauma history is not the first thing you share with someone new. Not the headline. You can speak about your past without it being the most defining thing. When wounds are part of your story, but not the headline, that is integration, and it is powerful, something worth pausing on and letting sink in before moving to what runs through all 5 patterns together. There's something running through all 5 patterns worth naming directly. Each one is an identity, a self you constructed often for very good reasons. The good person, the helper, the one needing to be understood, the one who sees potential, the wounded. Each became a weight. Each of those identities, however built, has become a weight, a pattern that once made sense, but is now actively preventing access to higher consciousness. Jung's core insight was that transformation is not additive. You cannot stack enough positive thinking on top of these patterns and override them. Patterns are too heavy for that. They absorb whatever you add and continue running underneath it. Addition fails here. Only subtraction works. The only thing that actually works is subtraction release. The willingness to let those identities die. That is the actual work of transformation. Jung was honest that this feels like dying, because parts of you that have existed for years or decades must genuinely end. You grieve them. You feel disoriented without them. There is a period where the old self is gone and the new one has not formed. Jung called this the void. He said it was not a sign that something had gone wrong. It was a sign something real was happening. Real transformation does not occur in comfortable, well-lit spaces. It happens in the transition, in the darkness between who you were and who you become. What emerges on the other side of those 5 releases is not a polished, perfect, spiritually elevated version of yourself. It is something more real. Someone who acts from authenticity instead of approval, seeking, who offers care from fullness instead of need, who trusts their own knowing without consensus. Someone who sees reality clearly and decides from that clarity, who moves through the world as a person who had experiences, not who is them. That is what raising your consciousness actually looks like. Not crystals and sage, though. There is nothing wrong with those at all, not affirmations. But the hard, honest, grieving work of releasing patterns that have kept you anchored to a version of yourself that no longer serves you. Jung's message was not comfortable. It was not designed to be. He was not interested in making transformation feel easy. He was interested in reality. If you want to vibrate higher, stop trying to add things and start letting things go. Performed goodness, compulsive helping. The need to be understood. Projection of potential, the wounded identity. These are the weights. Release them. Grieve what you lose in the releasing. That is the path fully. Discover in genuine surrender who you actually are when you are no longer carrying them. That is the path. It is not easy but real. Real transformation, the kind that sticks, the kind that changes the frequency you operate at every single day, is the only kind worth doing.